It's a brave act to sit with these plant medicines, but they really, once you get to know them, demand integrity. The moment that you even decide to sit with one of these plants, the plant knows why you're coming, where you're at, where your heart is, what your intentions are. Started to evolve my consciousness in ways that I had not ever experienced with ayahuasca, where I felt the plant so strongly outside of ceremony.
Welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast, where we talk about everything from spirituality, self-development, relationships, mindfulness, wellness, and everything that will help you embrace all that you are so you can expand into the best version of yourself. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. So on this episode, we invite a woman I met a little over a year ago from a somatic breathwork training that I was a part of. And her passion for the power of plants has taken her on a miraculous healing journey all over the world. She is a student of plant medicines and astrology, a breathworker, and currently a huachuma apprentice. Now a resident of Peru, she is continuing to follow the passion using modalities that include the breath in our lungs, the voice in our hearts, the plants that surround us, and the cosmic world within us. So it is a pleasure to introduce you to Paige Sommer. Paige, welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast.
Thanks, Adam. I'm so happy to be here and excited to have a beautiful conversation today.
So it has been such a joy to watch your journey over the last year, from you coming to learn how to be a somatic breathwork practitioner to then taking it out in the world on your own, and not just in kind of the local area where you were at the time, but really you've kind of traveled the globe in a way, taking this to people. So why don't you just take a few moments to catch all of us up on what has your journey been like to bring you to Peru today?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey the last year, I must say. So my journey to Peru, and basically my, spiritual journey, this kind of healing path that I've been on, it started, I think, like most do, which is going through a season of really dark and hard times. So my 32nd year was filled with a lot of loss. And I think all of that loss was losing a pet, losing my grandfather, and then I was in a relationship. And we also suffered a loss together. And all of these things, my whole life really just kind of fell apart. And I think in that, it brought up a lot of old traumas, right? Like it tends to do, old triggers, old childhood stuff. I had in my adolescence suffered a really long, horrible eating disorder, depression, anxiety, binge drinking. And it brought like all of those old wounds that I leaned on those vices to solve for back up. And I didn't get out of bed for a few months. I just let it really take me down until I decided I needed help. And that's kind of when I decided to go back to the plants. My first time journeying to Peru was with my brother back in 2015. And I had a really beautiful, tough experience with ayahuasca. And at that point, it totally changed my life. I thought I was going to go down that path, work with the plants. I then discovered iboga, and I was eventually going to actually work with iboga, going to take a trip to Africa to be initiated into the Bwiti tribe and full throttle. But then I got my dream job offer at the same time back in New York, and I ultimately chose the job over going to Africa. And so 7 years later, when I'm going through this new, very dark season of life, I knew in my heart it was that was when I needed to go back. I had basically not journeyed with the master plants in that many years. And so that brought me back to Peru. And it started me slowly chipping away at this healing journey. And all in all, it did take a full year. That was February 2021. 2022. February 2023 is when I came down here. So it took a whole year of processing and healing and slowly yeah, until it brought me down here full time.
Such an incredible story. I can vividly remember one of the last training calls, and you shared very vulnerably with the group of how much you were going through at the time and how much that course had really changed the way in which you were looking at the things that were happening and being able to see kind of a way through. Did you foresee that way through presenting itself in the same fashion as it has?
That's a great question. It's funny because I think if we're really paying attention to our lives and ourselves and our signs and the things that are coming in, and we have some perspective of it all, we can kind of piece together what's coming ahead, what's coming next. But in the grand scheme of things and the way that so much has shifted in such both a slow and very fast pace, I don't know. I think probably somewhere deep down, my intuition had a knowing. Because I remember when I was really in the thick of it and I was still in my relationship, I remember feeling like I had every reason like to stay in some ways, I just inertia was like the big one. It was just so hard to leave. So hard to leave my whole situation, my whole life, And I had felt pebble, like this one pebble of self-respect. And I just feel like I just held that in my hands and I just was like, that's all I was focusing on. It was just it was the tiniest little shred. And I just was like, that's what I'm going to focus on. And then, sooner or later, I just believed that it would get bigger and bigger and bigger until like none of the other stuff was there. And the most important thing was just following that, inner wisdom. So.
Would you say that that was the point in which you made the decision to start living life on your own terms versus kind of what everybody else in your life had projected onto you of what your life should look like?
Yeah, that was probably a very big moment of that, I think, because I think that's when I realized I didn't have to suffer, you know? Which is funny because in those thick of the moments, it's like suffering is ahead, like you have to like go through it to get out of it. But yeah, I do think that was the start of that. And I think a lot of people go through this, right? Where it's like you're told a certain story of the way that your life should go or what a quote unquote like good or successful life is. And, in the States, a lot of times that just looks like, do you have a good job? Do you got to have a nice place to live, a cool city to be in, like a nice partner or husband. And that stuff is wonderful, but, um, it just never came easy to me. It just always, I felt like I had the great apartment and I had the boyfriend, I had, this awesome job. Like I had that all and I still was so unfulfilled and just like uncomfortable in my own skin. And my mind was just always somewhere else or thinking, what else is out there? Um, and it's just so deeply ingrained in us all of the time, especially when our family is, has that same rhetoric and our friends are living those kinds of lives. You can just internalize that and get mad at yourself for like, well, what's wrong with you? Why can't you just be happy in this life? Or why can't you just have or get the things that everybody else has? And that's hard. It's hard because that's not really what's going on. But we're not told that, We're not told to listen to that voice that's saying, like, maybe this isn't for you. We're told, well, no, this has to be for me. This is for everybody. Um, so, yeah, so definitely had a lot of those hard, critical times where I just think I should be fitting into some place that I was never meant to fit into. So,
what a fantastic way to put it, because it really is. I mean, you and I were talking a little bit before we started the podcast of how we're both kind of living these very unconventional lives now. I mean, I live in a 240 square foot school bus, it doesn't get much more unconventional than that. So it's like learning to live life on your terms and be able to define what success actually means to you, even if to another person, that version doesn't look successful.
Yeah.
That really isn't what matters, because at the end of the day, even if, and you gave the perfect example, is like you were living the what looked like perfect life. You were following step by step what they say to do to gain the American dream, and yet still didn't feel fulfilled. I know my journey was very much the same way, of like following that path and, you know, having the house and the cars and like the business, and especially a business that's very materialistic in nature. And yet I woke up every day dreading the day that was coming forward,
Yeah.
versus now doing work that is so fulfilling on a soul level, even though currently, because I'm still building my business, just as you're still building your business, you know, I'm not necessarily where I'd like to be financially, but I'm fulfilled in a very different way that money could never buy. And how can you not call that success?
I also feel like when you get to that place, because I'm in a similar place too, like, yeah, I have my goals, I want to, but when you really sit in that, you've changed your life to align with, you know, what's true for you, what your true calling is or your true path is. I mean, I deeply believe, and I feel it in my body that you are supported, right? Like the universe is going to conspire to support you and help you. And so even though we might have these still little thoughts of like, oh, should I buy that? Should I invest in that? Should I, you know, because there's the money kind of conversation. Those thoughts, you know, they're always going to kind of maybe be there. You just have to quiet them down. But I really feel like the reality is like you're supported. And I must say, I love the name of the podcast, the Expand and Embrace, because that's how I feel about specifically that, where it's like when these things, you know, kind of come across these opportunities that present themselves in your life, and you have this initial, and part of me is kind of talking specifically financially, but you have this initial like, ooh, but can I make that work? Or, ooh, but can I do that? Lately, the message that I'm getting is like, expand into it, and like your life will expand with those choices and with those decisions, right? Like it's only going to get bigger if you constrict in those moments when these amazing opportunities come, just because you're scared of like what, like having a little bit of a bigger bill, or you know, disappointing somebody or whatever it is. Like, no, we're not listening to that voice. We are expanding. So I love that so much because I've really been feeling that lately.
Yeah, and I mean that's really the whole philosophy behind the podcast, which is, you know, named after my business. Is it's like it is all about embracing, and just like I say at the beginning of the podcast episode, we're helping everybody embrace all that you are so you can expand into the best version of yourself. Because until you embrace your limitations,
Mm-hmm.
you can't expand beyond them. So, like being able to acknowledge where your limitations are and rub up against those, they slowly start to expand. Then they
Mm-hmm.
slowly start to expand. And then all of a sudden, your capacity to handle stress, your capacity to handle anything that life throws at you also expands.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that this is coming up because this came up in the coaching call that I did this morning. And we were talking about this exact same scenario, but that as you do the inner work and you begin to expand your capacity to hold space, both for yourself and for other people, you begin to increase the size of vessel that contains all of your energy. And so if we think about this like a cup, we all start out with little toddler cups. And then as we expand that capacity, it maybe goes into a little like drinking glass. And then that expands a little bit further. And the next thing you know, we're at a 1-gallon milk jug. And then next thing you know, we're at a 55-gallon drum. And then next thing you know, it can keep expanding. But there's a caveat to this. The more you expand, the greater your capacity to hold energy is. However, if that energy gets depleted by you not following your personal practices, by you not following your purpose and passion in life, it then becomes that much more difficult to fill it back up again.
Oof, it's so true. I I just felt that like as you were speaking, because it is. It's like once I feel like it's up leveling in
Hmm.
all ways, like this healing journey, right? It's like you've mastered certain parts of your inner world or your behaviors or whatever it is. Maybe it's even in this physical realm, right? And so your energy expands. And with that, to quote Grandpa Ben from Spider-Man, with greater power comes greater responsibility. I don't know if I'm messing that up, but it's true. So then sometimes when you expand, guess what? You're also opening the door for criticisms. Or if you're putting yourself out there, you're opening the door for people to say like whatever kind of judgments or opinions that they want to say about you. That's one thing. The margin for error may be greater. The risk may be greater because you're living a life that you care more about the more that you expand. And so when you up level and when you grow that, it's like life is going to make sure that you're watching everywhere around you so that you can actually stay in that or grow further. Like it's going to challenge you and test you the more that you expand and the more that you grow. And it is not fun, and at the same time also like just this fascinating ride, because I like now in my life I feel okay, if I decide to do something and I consciously say, oh, I'm gonna put this out there. Sorry, dog. If you consciously say, I'm going to put this out there, I'm going to put myself out there, my writing out there, I'm going to put on this huge breathwork session, whatever it is, like, okay, now it's like all eyes on you in some ways. And I've had times where I've gotten some like backlash, and it just felt like such a test, like immediately I was like, oh, this is what that is, because I haven't ever done this before. And now I'm hearing things that I haven't heard before, but I think this is all part of it. It's like part of just growing. Like, can you hold that resonance? Do you have it in you, and can you expand even further? It's kind of like it's just an interesting little funny trick that life does to us all.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I love the direction that the conversation is going, which is totally different than kind of where we were talking about in the beginning. But that's the beauty of these flow casts, is just
Yeah.
letting it come through what wants to come through. But like, that's so true, because the more you begin to expand your capacity and the more you begin to live a life of alignment, the more the universe is going to be like, okay, I'm going to put this little test in front of you to see, do you have the devotion and dedication to keep going in that direction?
Yeah.
And it's just enough of a challenge to make you question, to make you wonder, is this the right direction? Should I actually be doing this because I'm meeting resistance? But if we were all pausing, taking a breath, and being honest with ourselves, the resistance is 100% our own. It's not, life is resisting us. We are resisting the life that's actually wanting to come to us by questioning if that's actually the direction that we need to go.
It's so true. It just is. It's just so true. It's always us, right? And then in those moments when that resistance becomes greater, do we self-abandon, right? Do we go back to our childlike self? Like for me, I feel like it's like 15-year-old Paige who's just wants to totally escape everything and just eat all the food and watch all the TV and like do all of these things that I know are not like, this is not where we should be, and every once in a while, like everything in moderation, right? That's totally fine.
Yeah.
But really being honest with yourself and clear with yourself about like, when am I leaning on that too much? Because that, I think for me in my adult life, I just labeled that like, that's me self-abandoning. And there's something about that term that really, when I recognize that I'm doing it, I just go, no, I'm not doing that anymore. Like that's like a hard no. So once I'm able to recognize it, I can kind of stop it in its tracks and really be the adult in that situation that I need to be and face the resistance head on. And and it's always ourselves. It's just so true.
Yeah. And it's of course always easier to recognize all of these patterns and everything in somebody else and be able to give somebody else that advice of like, oh yeah, this is what's going on. Here's what you should do. Like, let's do this breathwork session. You'll be good to go. Or here, have a huachuma ceremony and we'll be able to process through that stuff and you're going to be good. All great. And I can attest to the fact that ceremony and breathwork and everything has an amazing ability to help you see the blind spots that you're not able to see. But none of it matters until you can admit to yourself that you are the one that is causing most of your suffering.
Yes. And with that, I always think ceremony, or what we consider ceremony, everything is ceremony. You may sit in a breathwork session, you may sit with huachuma or ayahuasca or whatever it is. And what you get from that, the actual time and space of the ceremony, I'm sure there's revelations and insights and visions and so much beauty and so much healing, of course. But the real healing is in your day-to-day life. It's understanding that everything is ceremony. And once you start forming a relationship with your breath or with the plant spirits, knowing that that doesn't leave you. And so now you've kind of have this responsibility, which just comes with awareness, right? To take on all of those insights and those lessons and actually integrate them and learn from them in your day-to-day life. And that to me is like the most profound teachings of all of those modalities, is that it's not actually necessarily about the session. It's about what you do with the ceremony, with the session.
100%. Integration's the key. I'm sure you've seen it throughout your travels and spending time in plant medicine circles and things like that, where there's certain individuals that continue to come back and come back and come back and come back. And yet they're never really any different.
Yeah.
They keep coming back to the ceremony, getting aha moments, getting clues at what they need to do to change their life or turn their life around. But by not actually implementing those messages, by not integrating the different ways that they can show up in their own life to actually help make a shift, it doesn't really matter.
I see it all the time. In fact, so I live in the Sacred Valley in a town called Pisac, and it's a huge medicine community here. Well, maybe not huge. It's a small town, but it's a big medicine community here. And you see that a lot. They'll be here for 3 months, 4 months, and it's like every night, or every other night, they're finding a ceremony there. And there's not real discernment for who they're sitting with or where they're sitting or how they are. I feel it's a noble path to want to work with and sit with these plant medicines. So anybody that chooses that, they have courage. They're brave, right? It's a brave act to sit with these plant medicines. But they really, once you get to know them, demand integrity. That's the number one thing that I've learned. And not just the plant medicines, the psychedelic medicines, but all the herbs, like any plant that you work with, even if you just have tea with the plant, they want you to be living in integrity with them. And when you're constantly taking the medicine, you build up this reserve of medicine within you, right? Like the medicine starts to just be a part of you. And so the medicine is always talking to you. But do you want to be quiet enough to listen to what this plant spirit is telling you? Or do you just want the fireworks to go back to the ceremony and see visions and have crazy experiences? Because to be honest with you, that is so far from what these medicines are about. That's we're just silly humans where we want to see a light show. We want to be entertained. We want to have visions and all this. That's great. But the work that the medicine does is so far beyond that. It goes into all of our 10 bodies, our energy body, everything, and if you just kind of pile on medicine, pile on medicine, pile on medicine, take a look inside of your own energy body and see how that's affecting you, because it can kind of rot in there, if it's not actually being worked out or moved around or used. It can have a detrimental effect, really, and can kind of bring people down in some ways. I've seen that a lot, and I'm very aware of it. And so I think space after plant medicine ceremonies is just as medicine-y as doing the plants themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, for me on my own personal journey, it's been almost 5 years since I sat with ayahuasca and huachuma. Not huachuma. I've I've sat with huachuma more recently than that in 2020 when I was in Tucson, Arizona. They were
Oh, wow.
growing wild. And so I
Growth
heard the
everywhere.
call
The
and
beauty.
decided to just go ahead and process them myself and go throughout my own ceremony. And it was a very, very beautiful learning process.
That is beautiful. Wow. Good for you. I'm like very impressed. That's, yeah, really nice.
So when you say it takes courage to follow that path, I really understand what you mean, because especially when you choose to listen to what the plants are saying without a teacher there,
Yeah.
treating them as they are the teacher guiding the process, it's scary because you're walking in the dark and there's nobody there to hold your hand and to
Yeah.
guide you along the way. And what potentially is going to come of that, like, how deep are you going to go? How deep are you not going to go? But the thing that I've noticed time and time again throughout the various different ceremonies that I've partaken is that the intention is always more important than any other aspect
Yeah.
of the ceremony. Like, yes, it's important to have somebody of integrity that's holding space for you and creating, a very safe container. It is also important to have a great setting. But I think without the proper intention and the reason of why are you visiting and connecting with that medicine in the first place, none of it else really makes a difference.
Absolutely. I mean, the moment that you even decide to sit with one of these plants, the plant knows why you're coming, where you're at, where your heart is, what your intentions are. It's nice for us to verbalize them or make them very clear for ourselves and our journey, but the plants know everything about us. I mean, there's no hiding, right? That's like the whole point of these journeys. It's just such a stark mirror in front of us.
Yeah.
And so that's absolutely true. And I think the plants know when there's a certain level of respect there, and they know when it's not there. And the plants want to teach us. They want us to listen to them. They want to guide us. Like they want to help. They want to heal us. And every plant kind of has their own unique way of doing that. And so I think plants ultimately hold us in high regard. They expect us to respect them in certain ways, And so when we don't, and we don't respect ourselves even, like it's going to take you down a dark journey. And I still feel like ultimately a healing one, but at the same time, it's just not something to play around with, unless you genuinely feel a call, you genuinely feel respect for these plant teachers. Yeah, I mean, I think that's number one. Absolutely.
So, Paige, do you think that could be part of where the whole like bad trip comes from? Of somebody entering into a journey where either they weren't even aware that they were entering into a journey, which can happen sometimes,
Hmm.
or entering into a journey without any set intentions, without any rational thinking around it, just everybody around me is doing it, so I'm going to go ahead and do it too.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different types of trips, right? Like, um, I think, I do think it depends. I think when I hear bad trip, because for me, I don't feel personally that I've had any quote unquote bad trips, because every trip that I've had, and I've had some very dark, very intense ones, has ultimately been for my greater good, right? Or just in general, the greater good. And so when I think of a bad trip, I think of somebody who can't let go of control, because
Mm,
that's like the name of the game with these medicines is surrender.
yeah.
It's like, it's so hilarious and kind of links back to what we were talking about earlier, which is this idea that if we do X, Y, and Z, it gives us this sense and some level of control in this life. But like, I'm just going to say, spoiler alert, we don't have control over anything in this life. That's just, and anything that we think gives us some sense of control, we grab onto, right? That's just human. And these plant medicines, they will challenge everything that you think you know about the world, everything that you think you know about yourself, about the nature of reality, about the nature of consciousness, about nature in general, and our relationship to nature. And especially when you come from a society like ours, which just has such rigid structures and time and schedule and all of these things in place that we just feel they're so deeply ingrained. We like feel them physically, right? They're just like so a part of us, that, I mean, I've seen people take a medicine and just have this feeling of like they can't hold on to anything. They're not being able to rationalize or put words to things. And it's beautiful because to me, what's happening is their mind is slowly being deconditioned, right? Like the medicine is actually getting into their neural pathways and changing their brain and loosening things up. But it can be a very overwhelming, very daunting experience for people. I just had the experience of sitting in a few ceremonies with this man who was almost 80 years old. Yeah, I mean, and it's an outlier, right? That's not normal, but he was checked out by doctors and the Shipibos and everything people that were there. And he had just wanted it so badly. He'd wanted it for, I think, 10 years before, but couldn't because he was on some medication. And I saw him go through that. I saw him just struggle, right? Because he's almost 80 years old. So he's on the later end of his life. And all of a sudden, it's like he's getting these realizations and revelations that he never knew existed. And that can be, I mean, ego shattering, just mind, like, I mean, that can be such an intense experience that if you don't just allow it to move through you and accept it, you'll be fighting. You'll just be in a constant fight with the medicine itself. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's that cognitive dissonance that can come up when people are brushed against a new version of reality that is drastically different from the reality that they knew beforehand. And I feel very fortunate to have sat with other medicines before I sat with ayahuasca, and then having done a lot of internal journeying work and Reiki sessions and things like that to really prepare myself to be in ceremony and to have the awareness around what's actually transpiring within that ceremony and being open to whatever experience wants to come up. And even with having that intention of being open and going into it, I found that I did still have expectations of what I thought the ceremony should end up looking like.
Right.
Starkly different from how it actually looked. And that in and itself was a lesson of be open, because if you're so closed off and so rigid in feeling that it has to be a certain way, you're not actually going to invite in the magic and the beauty of the unknown.
It's so true. And as humans, we just live in our minds, right? So we go from the analytical stage before ceremony. We're like, okay, what's my intent? What do I really need to work on now? Okay, yeah, this is it. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to meditate on it. That's what my ceremony is going to be about. And then I'm wondering if this was your experience, but you go into ceremony and it's about something totally different, but then you go, oh, right, that's actually what was going on there. But I just wanted to, I was up here thinking that I could control it a little bit. Yeah.
100%. It's the intention that I put out there into the group at the beginning of the retreat versus the intention that I received in the first ceremony was very, very different.
Yeah.
Because the intention that I was putting on the retreat was coming from my analytical mind, thinking I knew best of what I needed to receive, versus the intention that I received in ceremony came from my heart.
Yep.
actually came from the place that knew what I truly needed, not what I thought I needed.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the beauty of these medicines, right? Like you said, I mean, it's we we can come to the medicine, we can think we're at a certain place, but as long as we're open, like the medicine's actually going to bring up what you need. You know,
Yeah.
it's really similar, honestly, to the breathwork sessions. Like we always say, like whatever is coming up is meant to come up. It's meant to move through you. It's the same philosophy. It's the same concept that happens in ceremony. It's like you have to feel it to heal it, and our bodies are smarter than we are. Our, the innate intelligence of our bodies, the innate intelligence of these plants, they know so much more than we can try and rationalize in our human minds about what's going on with us. And when you're open and they reveal these different like layers of healing that need to be done within you, I mean, it couldn't be a more beautiful process, because then you get to really learn more about yourself and what's really going on with you, what's going on internally and your energy field and your soma. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've mentioned a lot of different of the plant medicines and the master plant teachers. And specifically, your journey started with ayahuasca, and then you discovered iboga. And then you came back, I'm assuming, to ayahuasca again, and then found huachuma. So from all of those different experiences, what made you choose to apprentice with huachuma over the rest?
That's a beautiful question. I always felt a very, very strong connection to ayahuasca. She's a seductress in many ways. So that's why I think so many people fall in love with her. And I honestly don't have a true answer for this, other than it was just so obvious to me the first time I ever sat with Huachuma, where it was like, this is my teacher. And every time I sit with Huachuma, I feel that so deeply. I mean, I felt a big sense of Huachuma allowing me to remember who I am, remember my own roots, my own ancestry, remember on a larger scale about our, like, humans' relationship to nature. And it started to evolve my consciousness in ways that I had not ever experienced with ayahuasca, where I felt the plant so strongly outside of ceremony. I mean, so strongly. I felt my dreams change, my relationship to my dreams change, my relationship to any plant and herb, just like my ability to connect with different plants, different herbs, was so much stronger. Just the downloads that I was getting about healing, about where we're at as a society, what's happening with the evolving consciousness on the planet, what's needed, what my role is, what my future looks like. I mean, all of these things, they just felt so intimate with Wachuma, and I just started to trust, and it's still a process, the trusting, because just the way that our minds are wired, like it's sometimes you're going to be, well, I'm trusting a cactus, like what am I doing? But then you move from here to here and you go, yeah, I am trusting that cactus, the abuelito, as they call him, grandfather. And as you said before, like, he is first and foremost my teacher, 100%. I love my actual human teachers and the elders that are here and the Quiros and the Huachumeros. Like, I mean, the knowledge and wisdom that I get from them is just incredible. And I'm so grateful for that. But first and foremost, the teacher itself is actually Huachuma. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just knew it from like the moment that I drank it, that I was meant to sit with Huachuma quite a bit in this lifetime. And that I was going to probably change a lot of my life in order to have this plant be a part of it.
Yeah. Wow. There's so many things that I want to dive into of what you just said, but I want to rewind back to what you were saying about Huachuma making you remember.
Yeah.
And it made me think back to my experiences with huachuma versus ayahuasca. And I think the two work synergistically together. I mean, grandmother and grandfather, of course, they are in a relationship. They're in a sacred union. And I look at it because like ayahuasca, for the most part, in many of the traditions, is worked with at night in the dark, either very little light or no light whatsoever. Whereas huachuma traditionally is used during the daytime. And so I almost look at it as like ayahuasca is there to deconstruct what is happening in the shadow. And then huachuma is helping you to reconstruct everything in the light.
Yeah, I mean, beautifully, beautifully said. Huachuma is a light medicine. That's how it's kind of referred to, right? And so traditionally, the ceremonies are during the day. And part of that reason is because cacti love the sun. And so it wants to be taken and used during the day in the light of the sun. And there's there's this beautiful synergistic energy between huachuma and ayahuasca, where ayahuasca, grandmother, she comes in, she takes you by your ear, she pulls you into another room, she yells at you about something you did, she makes you, sit with her while she cooks, whatever it is. It's like there's less choice there. You're being pulled into whatever it is that grandmother wants you to look at. Now, the grandfather energy is so very different in such a beautiful grandfather way, which is that the medicine is there to open your heart. It's there for us to connect with nature. It's there for us to truly be present and be in our bodies, which is also quite different than ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, most of the time, is going to take you, out into the cosmos, into the shamanic realms, and really bring you other places. Huachuma does not do that. With Huachuma, the medicine is presence and that connection to nature and that open-heartedness. And so a lot of times what you'll feel with Huachuma, and I've heard a lot of people who I've sat with, that's, their first time with Huachuma, they'll say, they didn't necessarily know what to do, because another difference between Huachuma and ayahuasca is ayahuasca has in most traditions, has a very set ceremony. You sit down, it's songs, Icaros all night long, and it's in the dark, and it only lasts however many hours. Huachuma, the traditions, they vary the way that these ceremonies can be handled. Most of the time, you're on a mountain and just in nature, and if you go up to the mountain with a Kiro, who's like the Quechua shamans here that work with Huachuma, they'll just leave you on the side of the mountain by yourself to connect with the mountains. And so what I hear these people say who are just sitting with the medicine for the first time is like it wasn't taking them anywhere. And I find that really beautiful, because to me, the lesson in that is like, it gives you this blank slate. And it says, what do you want to think about? What do you want to talk about? What do you want to experience? Which is such a beautiful reflection of how we live our lives. Like, our lives are this co-creation with spirit, with the universe. And that relationship with Huachuma, where it takes you into the medicine space and says, what do you want to work on? What do you want to look at? And so it is a co-creation, because you sit on the front porch with grandpa. He's there, he's smoking a cigar or whatever he's doing. He's in his rocking chair being quiet. And you have to be like, hey, grandpa, let's talk about this. Hey, grandpa, let's look at this. Hey, grandpa, let's do this. And grandpa's like, okay, I'll take you. We can go. So that to me is like the big kind of difference between the two medicines. Yeah.
And that's such a great way to explain it, as ayahuasca being more of a journeying medicine. And in that way, I almost kind of feel like psilocybin is kind of the bridge between the two, because with psilocybin, it can bring you into complete, utter presence of the moment on a more lower dose, like what huachuma will bring you in. But it can also take you on a journey in a much higher dose, like ayahuasca. So many of these different plant medicines, it's like there is no one linear path to take.
Yeah.
It's more about learning to hear which medicine is calling you. And so like I would invite to any of you listeners, like if any one of these plant medicines, as we're talking about it, you get a physical response in your body, whether that be truth bumps or goosebumps, as many call them, or a tingling in your belly or tingling throughout your body, or just a inner knowing of that one. That's the path that you need to follow and you need to listen to. It's not that we're necessarily saying you have to take the path of ayahuasca or you have to take the path of huachuma or, psilocybin or cannabis or wherever you want to go, or any of these plant medicines for that matter, which kind of takes us into the direction I'd like to take the conversation now, Paige, since you are have studied herbalism for a long time or getting ready to go into another apprenticeship. How is it that people can, or how have you found that people are still able to get to very similar places using herbs that aren't psychoactive in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, well, I think foundationally it is built on forming a relationship with yourself and with, whatever plant allies call to you. The interesting thing about herbalism is it's based on elements, right? It's based on water, fire, earth, air. It's based on heat, it's based on cold, and all of these elements live inside of us, and the same energetics live inside plants and herbs as well. And then on top of that, every plant has a different spirit and different things that it's going to want to heal within you and teach you. So that healing path of just going towards the plants, not the psychoactive plants, but just any kind of herbs, it can be formed just honestly by being present with the plants, talking to the plants. You can make a cup of chamomile tea. You can put a tea bag in, or whatever you have. Maybe you have the loose leaf tea. Pour some hot water over it, and great, start taking a sip of your tea and not think twice about it. Or you can form ceremony and ritual around your morning cup of tea and call in the spirit of chamomile. And the spirit of chamomile, which, most people probably just think of as like, oh yeah, chamomile. I like to drink chamomile sometimes before bed, or chamomile, I like the way it smells. Chamomile is a powerful feminine spirit. It's a powerful healing spirit. And just opening up that dialogue between you and any herb, truly any herb, and asking that herb for whatever medicine you need. What is it you're looking for from these plants? And coming to it sincerely with that same integrity and just saying, like, show me your medicine, or bring me some clarity, or, heal this feminine wound that I have. Whatever it is, really connecting in, introducing yourself to the plants. And it doesn't even have to be like a big thing, but you can go outside and, like, right near me, I have this huge rosemary bush. Go outside and just approach a herb that's near you. Can I sit with you? And just sit next to the plant, but being very present with the presence of the spirit of the plant, introducing yourself to it, allowing just the spirit of that plant in that space to touch you and sit with you. If you really are able to connect in, you will feel the consciousness of those plants, and they will stay with you. Truly, they will stay with you. You'll find them in your dreams. You'll find them randomly in your thoughts. You'll have a thought to do something, and if you're connected enough, you can just go, oh, I think that was rosemary. And that to me is the beauty of folk herbalism and just forming relationships with these plants. And the like, as you're talking, it's like the barrier to entry to start forming these relationships with the herbs is none, right? I think there's some people here right now on this earth that are meant to partake and drink a lot of certain medicines, but I think they're meant to do that so others don't have to, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not for everybody. It's just plain and simple. Like, just psychedelics in general, they're not for everybody. There's a million other ways out there. Oh, motorcycle. There's a million other ways out there that that you can heal and that you can work with plants. So that's one of them.
This is the beauties of recording podcasts out of studio. You just deal with the noises and stuff that come along. It's okay.
Somebody dropping off wood.
On a motorcycle?
On a motorcycle, yes. Welcome to Peru.
That's so that is the thing that I loved about Peru was just how resourceful people were. You know, it's like people here are like, oh, I need to haul wood, so I need to go buy a truck. And then they go and buy a truck and drive a truck when they really don't need a truck, but they just need to haul a couple things that one time. Whereas it's like seeing people with, I mean, surfboards strapped to the side of their motorcycles and driving down the road, like just goes to show that you don't always have to have the quote unquote like correct tool to still get the job done. You can become resourceful. You can try different things, which I think is a perfect part to this, because herbalism in general is trying different things, which I think is funny that herbalism is considered alternative medicine when it used to be the only medicine. It was only until 200 years ago when we started having the, you know, invention of modern day medicine that it became alternative medicine. So in your studies, have you started to notice that same thing where there's been this like distinct point where we went from solely relying on herbalism to all of a sudden, and I guess more so solely relying on our relationship with the natural world to help heal ourselves, versus now relying on somebody who is outside of us, who only knows us from going and seeing them for 15 minutes at a time every so often, but yet we're supposed to trust them telling us that they know our body enough that know what's wrong with it. And here, take this pill to just make you feel better.
Yeah. I mean, yes. So it basically goes from, you know, the Western doctors today, like you said, they find the symptom and they solve for the symptom. In herbalism, everything is way more of a holistic view. You're looking at your body constitution, your energetics at the moment, what you're going through, where your emotional, state is at. You're looking at it completely holistically and diving as deep as you can, peeling back the layers of what this problem could stem from, you know. And in Western medicine, it's just not like that. And like you said, we're expected to totally and fully trust and outsource our own healing and our bodies and our mental health to people we just blatantly don't know, and for the most part who don't have time even to get to know us, because that's the way that our insurance works and the healthcare system works. And I think one of the most empowering things and like confidence building things about practicing herbalism and just working with herbs in general is it forces you to know your own body, and it gives the power back to you, because it reminds us we can heal ourselves. Like this idea that we have to outsource our healing, like it's fallacy, just pure illusory. We can always heal ourselves. And in fact, if we can't heal ourselves, the idea that somebody else might be able to know what's going on with us more is almost laughable. I mean, thank God for Western medicine, right? Thank God for antibiotics. Like, there's a place for both of them, absolutely. So I don't want to like keep a stigma around, you know, if you need pills or anything like that, you know, pharmaceuticals, like please take them. We want people healthy. But I also think it's very important to understand the mindset behind taking your health into your own hands and understanding what we have when we have herbs, and that herbs can actually heal us and help us understand our bodies and what our bodies actually need and what they're asking for and where our bodies are connected to our emotions, you know. I mean, obviously somatic release breathwork is like a beautiful way to push our emotions out of our body. But what happens when we suppress our emotions is we get sick. It starts to literally pour out of us in different ways. And our organs, like in traditional Chinese medicine, our organs are all linked to different emotions, right? Our lungs are grief, our liver is anger. And so it just helps us really get to learn what's going on inside my body. The left side of our body is the feminine, the right side of our body is the masculine. If you've got a pain in the bottom of your left hip or in the bottom of your left part of your stomach, and you just got into a fight with your mom or something like that, it's like there's different ways to really understand what's going on with us. And yeah, I've loved it. It's been very confidence building for me to work with the herbs and understand that I am in full control of my own body. I can heal myself. We can all heal ourselves. And in fact, I think it's very important that we all understand that and be intentional with what we put into our bodies, what we consume, how just that awareness of how we're feeling and what's going on with us. And herbs for me have been the true catalyst for that, honestly. So I think there's room for both, but I think reliance on Western medicine to solve for our symptoms, it's a path down a road where you're going to be disabled in many ways. You're just not going to ever be the full expression of yourself when you continuously just give it away and give it away. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like if I get in a car accident, please take me to a hospital, give me the pain meds, like stitch me up, do the necessary things. But if I'm going through depression, if I'm experiencing anxiety, if I am dealing with a hard time in my life or some pain that's coming up that I don't normally experience, start asking yourself, where is this stemming from? Instead of automatically taking the route of, oh, let me go talk to the doctor and tell them this is what I'm going on, because that is true. All they're going to listen for are, what are the symptoms? And then what prescription do I assign based upon these symptoms that I was given? Instead of asking the deeper, harder questions. Well, what's your life like? Like, what do you have going on right now that may be a contributing factor to what you're experiencing? Are you constantly waking up with a sore throat because you're not actually speaking truth in your relationships? Are you constantly experiencing hip and lower back pain because you're carrying the weight of the world? So there's so many different things and different avenues that we can look at the quote unquote symptoms that our body is giving us, when all of the symptoms our body is giving us is just a form of communication. It's trying to get our attention to say, something is out of balance here. I am not currently in homeostasis. Please help.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our bodies are constantly talking to us. It's just whether or not we want to listen anymore, And I think also a part of the reason that in general our society is so sick and so reliant on these pharmaceuticals is because of our disconnection to nature. We used to live in such accordance with the moon cycles and the seasons and eating seasonally and eating locally and having our feet on the ground and, going for walks and foraging and picking what was around us and understanding and learning and knowing the local herbs and knowing what you need to be drinking when you've got a stomach ache. It's very backwards now, especially in a lot of US cities. Like I lived in New York City for 7 years. And so I can't even imagine how many times I probably went a full week without putting my feet on soil. And it's completely disruptive to our nervous system to live in that way and to live so far from nature. I mean, thank God for Central Park, but it's like, I mean, the problem is so much bigger than that. And I noticed that coming here, just my health shifting, my nervous system was totally shot. And just coming here and allowing it to just, it's okay, and allowing nature to slowly but surely heal me and show me how, like, that remembering of how we're supposed to be living in accordance with nature. I'm sure you had a big shift like that too when you first started living on the bus and you were in nature every night. I mean, it changes your whole body, getting sun on your stomach, like just the act of actually being in or around nature makes us healthier and solves for a lot of that.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the main reasons why, like, every space that I've lived in recent times, I always have a bunch of houseplants.
Yeah.
Or in the past, like, I've had some live planted aquariums, and like I have a little, what's called a paludarium right next to me on my desk here, that's like water on the bottom half and then like plants on the top half, because
Yes.
even when I'm not in nature, I want to be surrounded by nature, because it really does, like, plants just have this natural ability to put you at ease. They clean the air that you breathe within a space. And, being in a small, confined steel tube, I'm happy to get all the help with cleaning the air and really trying to create a more inviting space. And that's also why, like, we have a lot of woodwork within our bus, because again, I wanted to feel
Mhm.
like I was in nature. And just being able to live that close and having visited to the Sacred Valley, I can attest for the energy difference that you feel even flying into Cusco. And like, Cusco is a massive city, but
Yeah.
it feels drastically different than, I've never been in New York City, but I've been to Los Angeles and live outside of Seattle. And it's a very different feel, because people who live in Cusco still have that connection to nature.
Yeah.
They still take time out of their day to go spend time in nature. There still is a lot of nature around and within the city versus, Seattle. Yes, there's a lot of trees sporadically here and there. There's a lot of parks that you can go to, but still it's a lot of concrete. It's a lot of steel. It's a lot of glass. It's a lot of, negative frequencies from Wi-Fi and cell phone signals and all the other stuff that goes into a
Mm.
city, that when you go to a space like Pisac, where it's buried in the heart of this beautiful valley, surrounded by mountains and a river that runs through it, and all of this lush plant life that's only a drive away from even more jungle. And it's just, I mean, it speaks to my heart so much that you're living there, because I fell in love with Peru when I traveled there and went and hiked up through all of the ruins up above Pisac all by myself. and
Nice.
and and just to, like, be in an environment where people are happy with their life as it is and not with how they think it should be. They're present in the moment.
Yeah, it's very, very true. And also, I mean, part of the culture here, it always has been like the Quechua culture, the Incan culture. It's this deep reverence for the elements, for the directions, for the apus, which is the Quechua word for mountains. I mean, that these are their gods, Inti, the sun god. It's like these are still so revered and so worshipped. And you can feel that. You can feel that culture still so alive here today, which is, I mean, one of the main reasons why I moved down here was just I I I wanted to be around that culture and that lifestyle and living in accordance with nature and just learning about the history of the Incans and the Quechua and the Chavin and like how they use these lands. And you can feel when you're up on the mountain, or even like Sacsayhuama, which is in Cusco, Temple of the Moon. These mountains feel like magnets. Like your body just almost like I almost feel like I just want to lay down on them. Like my body just feels so drawn into the power of these mountains. It's I've never felt anything like it in my life. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. It's just a very special place. And it's teaching me so much every single day. I mean, it's teaching my body, it's teaching my consciousness, but it's also, I mean, just the amount of learning about um, you know living sustainably, living in
Mm,
accordance with nature. It's been a beautiful place to do that and to decompress from living in New York City for too long.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's always blown me away at people who, like, love the city, because I've never been one of those people. I was raised in a small kind of farming town, and nature was everywhere. I've as a kid, I was always out playing in the woods and just being in nature. And so the idea of like loving to live in a city and loving city life, and I just have always had such a hard time wrapping my brain around it. So any of you listening, like if you love the city, please like reach out to me on Instagram, like tell me your perspective and like help me understand like what is it about the city that's so drawing, because I always find myself like my happy place is mountains and trees.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if there's a form of body of water in amongst
Mhm.
that, like even better. But
Yeah.
even just mountains and trees, like I could be in that all day.
Yeah. Save yourself. Don't become a city person, I think. I don't think that's in your future. So
No, and really, I've done it a few times, and driving a 40-foot school bus around a city is not fun. So I try to avoid major cities as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny because I always felt the same way. I grew up in Long Island, and I was just always on the water, on the bay, just a big ocean girl. And then in my early 20s, I was traveling a lot. And then it was that moment when I got back and was kind of torn between this dream job as a resident correspondent at the United Nations versus going to Africa and working with Iboga. That's why I ended up in New York. And then it's like that inertia, that life happens. And, 7 years later, I, thank God. I mean, it was a funny thing. My building got foreclosed on. Like, I was so desperate to leave. And I was just like, how am I going to get out of this lease? How am I going to get out of this lease? And a few days after I had gotten back from a trip to Peru, like it must have been when I was still in the somatic breathwork training, uh, I got these papers like served to my door that my building was being foreclosed on, and I was like, "Thank you, universe, I'm out." Like that's like the last thing. I'm like, I'm out of here. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's like these cities, they can kind of mess with you, right? Because it's that same thing of like being disconnected with nature, is you get so used to a certain form of life, which is just convenience after convenience, and never having to try too hard for anything, never really having to be resourceful because the city has everything that you need in one block, and it's especially New York, you don't need a car there. I see a lot of people, you move there in your early 20s, and then you're just too used to living in New York to live anywhere else. You just think, I can't live anywhere else. I've lived in the city too long, and I've seen so many people just not know how to actually get themselves out of the city. But I think, and I love New York so much. I mean, my family's from there. Like it's home to me. But I also think it's like this. I don't want to say dark force, but it's a little bit of this kind of human mind virus, right? It's more of that like overconsumption, again, like looking externally for every little thing and living outside of the natural world, and so far outside the natural world that I think there is a little bit of this kind of dark magnetic pull that can kind of keep you there. You're being fed certain ideologies, and you're just in that skyscraper, work too hard, don't have a life of your own, paying rent, kind of cycle. And I think it can be hard for some people to leave.
I mean, isn't New York the city that never sleeps?
That is correct.
So, I mean, that in and of itself is like, okay, if the tagline is the city that never sleeps, so that's like the intention.
Mm-hmm.
The intention to always be producing, always be creating, always be working, always be hustling. And you know this just as well as I do, just from the teachings of somatic breathwork, but if we're always in that fight or flight mode,
Oh yeah,
and never give our body any time for rest, it is the perfect formulation for total utter burnout or dis-ease to start to show up within the body.
yep.
And we wonder why are there so many sick people in the world? Because of this constant feeling that we need to be productive, and that to be totally like open and vulnerable, like that's something I personally am still working through, is still trying to find that balance of
Mhm.
being productive, still working on my business and trying to continue to be present there, but also giving myself the space and the time necessary to be able to have enough rest that my body still can do all the natural functions that it needs to keep me going. Because if I get sick or if I'm too burnout, then I'm not going to be productive anyways. So really trying to find that balance with having all of the right daily practices and doing things that help to bring joy into my life and spending
Mhm.
that time doing all of those things, even when I feel like I technically should be doing something else. That should is something that I've really been trying to shed,
Yeah.
because the only thing we should be doing is being.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's so hard. And the longer that I live here, the more that I realize that our society, like in the US specifically, is it is harder to live a life where you're eating super healthy, you're taking care of your mental health in a holistic way. You're not over consuming social media. Maybe you don't even have social media. You're not using a lot of plastic, like all of those things. It's harder to do that in the States than it is to just be in the society we're in, which is that programming of like workaholism and productivity and that capitalistic mindset. It's very hard to shake that. And I think, like you're saying, it is this constant process of kind of checking yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
And I love that you said, doing things that brings you joy, because I do think that's like the fast track button to shake it off, right? Like
Mm.
just realizing that maybe I feel a little overworked today. Maybe I don't necessarily need this long breathwork session. Maybe I just need like to do something that's going to make me laugh, or like to just like be silly. Like maybe that's a faster way for me to just kind of shake off all this stuff. I
Yeah,
think those are also great practices. So
absolutely. Yeah. Well, Paige, this has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to know like more of your backstory, more of what you've got going on right now. I would love to ask you the embrace and expand signature question. Paige, what did you have to embrace in your life in order to expand to the person you are today?
I had to embrace my true nature, which is that I was never going to follow anybody else's idea of what life was. It was always meant to be that I was just going to be on my own very unique path. And I fought that for a very, very long time, to my own, to my own detriment. And it wasn't until I really embraced that truly, and I didn't listen to anybody else but myself and my own, inner guidance, that my life totally expanded. And it is expanding, and it's a beautiful path to be on. And it's was difficult, but it's worth it in every sense of the way. And I hope to continue to live that truth.
Mm, fantastic. I'd love it. That's a new one for the podcast. We haven't had that answer yet before, which is
Oh, beautiful.
one of the reasons why I love this question so much, is because every answer is unique. And even in the couple of occurrences where people have said the same answer as some other guests, it's still how it showed up in their life is still
Mm,
very unique to that individual. So it's always so beautiful at what people have had to embrace throughout their lives to like get them to the point where they're at right now.
absolutely.
So, for the listeners who are maybe really interested in following a path with whether it be plant medicines, whether it be herbs, what's one last piece of advice that you could leave them with to help send them on that path?
I think a beautiful way to even get started is to understand how your own way of connecting to, whether it's plant spirits or herbs or whatever it is, like what that looks like for you. Because we can connect, like I said, even just with a cup of tea, or sitting with, grandfather huachuma. But it's really deciphering what's true for you. How do you drop in? How do you get the wisdom of the plants around you? And again, it can be very unique. And so understanding that doesn't have to look like how other people do it, doesn't have to look like how I'm talking about it today. It is always going to be very unique to each one of us, the way that we connect. And so I think just understanding that before you set out to these things. And so it's beautiful to have teachers, but knowing that like the true teacher and the true path maker lives inside of you. And so just kind of having that conversation with yourself and finding out what that looks like for you.
Love it. Yes. I really resonate with that answer, because this kind of the whole conversation, there's been that underlying note that you are your own healer, you are your own guru, you are your own teacher, you are your own master. You just need to fucking trust yourself. Trust what comes up, that is true. And it doesn't have to be true for anybody else but you.
Mm-hmm.
You and you alone know the truth of how life should be for you. And I feel like the intuition, those little inkling aha moments that we get sometimes, is it's like that's our soul speaking through us, trying to do its best to guide us to the life that it knows that we could live if we just get out of our own way.
Yeah. And if we just listen to ourselves. I mean, I think just as you were speaking, I'm just thinking about how many times in my own life, and I think a lot of people probably resonate with this, that you just like, you look to others, whether it's your friends or your family, to like validate that, even though you're struggling or whatever it is that you're going through, just like that constant need to affirm ourselves through others. Like, affirm yourself through yourself, because nobody's inside of you, right? Nobody's listening to the thoughts that you're having. Nobody's experiencing the emotions that you're experiencing. Nobody has your heart. And so really understanding that that's like so unique, and that's where your future lives, right? Your future lives in your energy body. And so really getting to trust yourself and know yourself and trust your intuition and understand that you, as much as anybody else and more than anybody else, have the answers to the questions that you're asking other people,
So Paige, if the listeners really enjoyed what you had to say today and they want to further connect with you, what's the best avenues to get in touch with you?
So the best place would probably be Instagram. So you can follow me at paige.sommer, Sommer. And my website is linked there. So that's where my breathwork is and my blog is. So I'm trying to write about a lot of the plants that I'm working with, as I continue on this herbalism and plant medicine journey. And so follow along.
Wonderful. Well, I will definitely continue following along in your journey, because I am living vicariously through you, of living in Peru and being in the Sacred Valley, enjoying. I am hoping 2024 is going to be the year we'll be able to make it back to Peru, and actually hoping to get a group of people together for an embrace and expand retreat of some sort. So,
oh my gosh, that would be amazing. Yes, please.
Yes, I would. Something that maybe you and I off podcast can start talking about, trying to coordinate something like that.
Totally.
Because I
I've
have so
already a
many
million ideas.
I have so many like clients and acquaintances and other breathwork practitioners that I've gotten to know that really have loved what I've had to say about going to Peru and would love to have that experience. And so I would just love to be a part of helping to facilitate that experience, plus being able to go on a trip myself too. Like,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the place for it, for sure.
yeah.
There's just so much healing that happens here, like without even doing any plants or doing any breath work. It's just, this place is just very healing in and of itself. So that would be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, so listeners, keep your ears open for information in the future of anything like that coming out. Really appreciate your time today, Paige, and just gracing us with your knowledge and information around plants and just helping to share your light with us. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Adam. This has been so beautiful, and I'm so honored to be a guest. And I love this podcast, love your work, and I'm excited to see what comes in the future for it.
Oh, appreciate that so much. And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. As always, I will have Paige's information down in the show notes below or in the description if you're viewing this on YouTube, so that you can connect with her, see what she's all about, look at some of the beautiful posts that she makes on Instagram, and continuing to learn more information about how you can engage with plants, herbs, in order to embrace everything that you are so you can expand into the best person you are. So thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening to another episode, and I'll catch you on the next one.